Welcome to the Shadow Mike podcast and YouTube channel, which aims to provide you with language, tools, and guidance in your journey towards personal and relational wholeness. We'll discuss topics ranging from psychology, spirituality, leadership, sexuality, and more. My name is Michael, and I'll be your guide for stimulating musings and host for insightful interviews with thought leaders, practitioners, and experts who have a thing or two to share about living an integrated and meaning-making life. Whether you're looking to deepen your connection with your interior world, overcome challenges in your relationships, or expand your psychosomatic horizons with fresh perspectives and paradigms, the Shadow Mike podcast and YouTube channel offers a safe, playful, yet challenging space for dialogue and introspection. It is all a gift, so let's go enjoy it together. Hello and welcome back. I want to spend some time talking about shadow from a collective perspective. Oftentimes when I talk about shadow or shadow work, it's very individual. And that's intentional because for there to be really any practical way forward in terms of healing, discovering, integrating shadow, it has to start with an individual. And then that individual can take their work and move it into their collective spaces. It can start with the collective. However, even in a collective space, it has to be rooted individually, right? So, but it's important that we understand shadow is not just individual. We have to move it into the collective spaces because otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense. People often come to me and they're looking at parts of themselves that are hidden, repressed, and denied. They have experiences from their family of origin, from their childhood and their school spaces, the particular, communal or regional or national background that they have different experiences, but there's commonality because our shadow is formed as our conscious personality is built or cultivated. And that's our ego. And as our ego is being developed, we are essentially unconsciously discarding into the shadow the parts of us that are otherwise not going to help us meet our needs, not allow us to move forward and kind of in our development to meet the developmental tasks that are necessary especially early in life, but really the first half of life, all the way through adolescence and early adulthood. So to understand shadow, really, we have to understand that how it's cultivated is relationally. Shadow is cultivated not by an individual's experience by itself, but it's the individual's experience in a social environment. And that social environment isn't just the kind of observable relationships, like mom, dad, coach, teacher, but we're talking about like an atmospheric thing. We're talking about how shadow is cultivated simply by the air you breathe psychologically, by the ground you walk on, metaphorically, right? To start there, we have to understand that we are not simply responding to the individual experiences, but we're responding to an ecosystem that helps to cultivate that shadow. So, shadow, as a review, is a term that Jung really developed in a much more robust way from Freud. To be the parts of ourselves that we hide, repress, and deny, and otherwise are not in relationship with. Now, the collective shadow is essentially that. It's just on a collective scale. And I want to look specifically at Christianity. Not to pick on Christianity, but it's doing its fair share of damage because of how much shadow and shadow making is in it. I like to use the term the common Christian myth, actually, because the common Christian myth is a great term to encapsulate the variety of experiences that people from a lot of different streams of Christianity have, right? If I were to talk about, what does God think about anger? A Baptist, a Methodist, an Episcopalian, a Jehovah's Witness would all come and have kind of a similar stance towards anger. And that's what I mean when I talk about the common Christian myth. It's just kind of this like mythology that guides how we live, what the possibilities for our lives are, what the possibilities for how we do our inner work, where we can go, where we can't go, that are common to those of us who have this kind of one-sided spirituality or myth that we've been immersed in. So the common Christian myth has long been associated with ideals of light and purity and perfection. And this often neglects the darker experiences of life, right, that are just common, right? I mean, we all experience the death of someone we love. We all experience the dark night of the soul, right? Those seasons of time where life is just caving in, and we are ceasing to be able to find our footing. David Steindl-Rast makes this point. He says that noting that image of God that is purely light can often alienate our true human experience, right? So then when we're disconnected from our own human experience, we really can't connect with the divine because we are not even coming from a place of solidity. We're actually always trying to find solidity, but we can't find solidity that way, right? We can't try to extinguish our experience in hopes that we'll connect with some sort of objective external ideal. It's not about that. It's actually about living our experience and allowing our experience to live us, whatever that is, and allowing from that place connecting with the divine. By denying the darkness within, the common Christian myth inadvertently shadows certain aspects of all of us. This focus on an idealized divine image can lead followers, believers, those of us who have left the church, to suppress darker traits, creating spiritual disconnection. So many people I work with, talk with, myself included, left the church a long time ago. But it takes a long time for the church to leave you. And some of the guiding foundational beliefs that the common Christian myth passes on become so intertwined with our DNA psychologically that, we consciously will say, oh yeah, I don't believe God is judgmental, right? But unconsciously, at a deep, deep core level, likely, unless you have done significant work to rewrite that script, that belief of a judgmental, divine, universal being that is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-encompassing still lives there. And you can know that when you look at your life and you're often paralyzed by fear around decision making. You look at how you might move towards relationships with people or with money or with your work, and find that there's this kind of underlying existential anxiety of like, I could make a wrong decision, or there is some kind of right path that if I were to be clued in on it, I would go. But until I know for sure, until I have certainty, I won't be able to do that. That is at least a good indicator that the common Christian myth that there is some kind of divine being that has a very specific will for your life that may or may not be what you want, that may or may not be connected to who you know yourself to be, positive or negative. It could be something that's so grand and so amazing, and you have no connection to it in your actual life, but you're like, well, I believe God has called me to this, and so I'm just waiting, right? Or you could have such an unconscious existential fear that you're off the mark, that you essentially never make motion one way or the other for fear that, by moving, you're going to make a wrong step. So those are the kinds of things, like when I talk about the common Christian myth, I'm not just talking about the stories and the images and the rituals. I'm talking about how they got embedded in your body, in your psyche, and how they still guide and dictate and essentially keep you from living authentically. When we suppress our shadow, right, in favor of this kind of divine light, right, it can wreak havoc on our psyche, on our soul. Like it can lead to a lot of psychological health issues. I don't have data to back this up, and I'd be curious if anyone listening finds or knows if there is research. I imagine there is, but I have so many examples of people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s who live their life hook, line, and sinker for this common Christian myth, right? They were faithful to the end. Sure, there's stories of failing and not being perfect, of course, but they see themselves, and others may even see them as faithful, right? They were faithful to the end. And what they were faithful to was a particular image of God, a particular will of God, a particular moral directive that God had. And people who have done this, who have lived towards the light and excluded the darkness, people who have lived towards purity and excluded anything that might be considered defiled or sinful to the best of their ability, often get to the point in their life in the last half or last quarter of life and don't have friends, don't have significant undiagnosed mental health issues, have chronic physical issues that no one knows, no doctor's able to point to. I think everyone knows someone who has gone to many doctors and at the end of all of that still don't know why they're having the physiological symptoms that they're having, right? But then not only all of those things, but they move through life constantly triggered, constantly waiting for something either really grand to happen, like the rapture, for example, or constantly waiting for something really bad to happen. Hypervigilant, right? There's a hypervigilance in that way of existing, because if you try, Plato there's a quote that comes from Plato that says, the Greek philosopher, that says, every light casts a shadow. And the closer we get to the light, the darker the shadow becomes, right? We even know this, right? If you were to move towards a lamp and it was the only light in the room and you were to literally hug the lamp, it would cast this massive shadow in the room. And that's oftentimes what we're essentially taught to do in the common Christian myth. It's to move as close as you can to the light, but the closer and closer you get to the light, the larger your shadow becomes. And when your shadow is that large, then you cultivate that in anyone else that you're in relationship with, right? If they stay in relationship with you and you feel comfortable with them, it's very likely that your shadows have merged and life is getting smaller and smaller. And the thing is when our life stays in the shadow, unconscious, it doesn't just stay there. It doesn't just it's not like Santa's bag of gifts where everything's just hanging out unanimated. Shadow material is massively animated. It is energetic, and it takes a significant amount of energy to keep that stuff in our shadow. first of all. But that stuff is also pushing. The more it stays in our shadow, the more it pushes out into our lives trying to be seen, which means we have to suppress it even more. It takes even more energy the further in we go. But the way it comes out is through projection. And we project it onto people. And then when we project it onto people, now this can be positive, but let's talk about the negative for a second. When we project our shadow, our negative traits, qualities, personality, ways that we just show up in the world, that like essential parts of who we are, when we project those things onto people, we will war with them. We will fight with them. We will be suspicious of them. We will lean away from them. We'll cross the road to avoid them. But the more you do that, the more that, like, you cross the road, but then you get to the other side of the road and there's someone else that also triggers that. And it becomes, like, to use that metaphor, it's like, okay, well, I guess you're going to go walk in the road, but then, like, you're in the road and there's more stimuli there. There's more trigger. There's more experiences of having to come face to face with what you don't want to see, what overwhelms you. And such a person likely will just stop going for walks, metaphorically, literally, like, will just like become reclusive, limit their communal scope to spaces where they know they can predict almost certain safety, at least in their minds, right? So the common Christian myth continues to do this. If we were raised in it, if we were incubated psychologically early in life in that kind of space, it will continue to cultivate that in us until we find a different way, until we give it a new direction, until we not only say, yeah, consciously I know this, but like we start descending down into what are the core guiding beliefs, right? Our shadow is, in some ways, it's a guide. It will guide our lives. Like, if we work with it, our shadow will guide us towards what we need to see and integrate so that we can get back a lot of life energy. But if we refuse to engage our shadow, it will guide our lives by essentially contorting us to constantly avoid what we don't want to see. And we will move through life physically and psychologically and relationally off balance, ill, unable to tolerate more and more spaces in our world, unable to tolerate the change and evolution in the people we love, right? Because like you can love someone and then but if your shadow is, you have a massive shadow around sexuality and you have a grandchild that comes out as queer, that's going to be an inflection point in your relationship with them, because it's an inflection point in your relationship with yourself, right? All right. So what's a way forward, right? Noticing our projections, noticing what we see in others that creates a charge, positive or negative. A positive experience might be that you're constantly drawn to this person, right? They're showing up in your dreams. They're showing up in your just like the energetic experience around them. You just feel really drawn to them. It could be a leader. It could be someone that you admire that has some kind of quality that you don't believe you have. But again, if that continues to stay on them, then you will idolize them and disown this, what you would call a golden shadow, onto them, and you won't own it in yourself. So it's important to notice our projections, because our projections are often the first indicators that, oh, there's something out there that I need to look at in myself. Those people become a mirror. I like to think of them as a rear view mirror or a side view mirror in a car, right? You're looking in front of you and you're seeing an object that's in front of you, but that object in front of you is actually reflecting back so that you can see what is behind you in your shadow. Also, a way forward, especially if, I think everyone is inherently spiritual. It's just that spirituality has been so narrowly defined that people often have to define themselves in the common Christian myth as anti myth, anti-religion or atheist. But I get that. And actually, I can understand that. I also think that it can be a really healthy developmental step when you're leaving something, right? Because your God image and the image for spirituality has been so fucked with, frankly, that like, you can't reimagine that yet. You almost have to detach from it in order to be able to detox and slowly be invited back into it. So just as a side note, if you are someone who is in that particular moment, that inflection point where you've had to throw away your relationship with God, with the divine, but there's something bubbling up in you, like you know that when you feel it, let me know, reach out to me, because that is a moment that has massive potential for embracing authentic spirituality. So a way forward would be to explore how the divine is imaged authentically, organically, and I would even say psychologically indigenous to you. So if you're always told that God is a male, there are many people who the biggest transformation they've experienced is imagining God as female, right? Like as more of this mothering, grandmothering, gentler experience. Yes. But that also may look like an image of God that is anthropomorphic, right? That like you need an image. And we're not talking about, this is the thing, like we're not even talking about God in this kind of common Christian myth idea of like an all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful, all-creating external force that lives inside of your heart kind of thing. An image of God may simply be what Bill Plotkin, who's has a number of books, Soulcraft being one of them, but he talks about soul initiation, right? He talks about soul encounters. So like having a soul encounter with an animal, Bill Plotkin's personal experience around this is a butterfly. Okay. And was that for him the divine creator God? No. This is much more expansive and integrated with self and creation. And that might be what you need to lean toward too. Something that has already revealed itself to you. Jung once said that he was asked about like what God is, how he thinks about God, and he said, "I call God that which comes across my path, both violently and recklessly, and changes my life for the better or worse." I'm like, Jesus, I've sat with that for years, because that changes my life for the better. Got it. Changes my life for the worse. That one's hard to grasp onto unless you understand that for the worse is how the ego is perceiving it. A rigid ego, conscious perspective on the world can encounter the divine, and it can be the worst experience for the ego. Now, for the soul, for the unconscious, it becomes a liberation, right? But that may take some time. I mean, Jonah being cast over the boat, right? The myth of Jonah and the whale, right? Cast over the boat, falls into the water, is surely going to drown. This is a worst case scenario, and is swallowed up by a whale. Okay, it got worse. But in that, I like to call them fairy tales. In that little fairy tale, there is an encounter with the divine that is so expansive and so other that it brings Jonah all the way to the end of himself, and he now encounters something soulful. It brings him to the end of his egoic perspective and into something far more expansive. So that's the invitation, perhaps, is how can you embrace how the divine is showing up? It could be through something as terrible as being overthrown, the conscious personality being overthrown, overboarded, and sinking and being swallowed up and enveloped by something. It could be that. It could also be something far more gentle. It could be something that is invitational and hospitable, but feels really terrifying to embrace because it's the devil that you don't know. It's safer to go towards the God you know than the devil you don't. So what would it be like to embrace, the hospitality that is actually surfacing, that's abundant, right? It may be really hard to receive that, but if you can catch a thread, an image of what that is, and slowly move toward it and begin releasing what is otherwise not serving you any longer, that's the way towards authentic spirituality that allows you to detach from the common Christian myth at that unconscious level and begin aligning your conscious and unconscious life so that something new can animate you, right? We started talking about the collective shadow, but kind of found our way into authentic spirituality. To connect those together a little bit, in order to move towards authentic spirituality, we really do have to address the ways that the collective experience, our collective experience, has cultivated, shaped, and essentially hemmed us into a certain way of thinking, believing, and acting in our life. And if we can diagnose, like, what are the ways that I just assume? Like, we talked about collective shadow being like the atmosphere and the ground. What are the things that you assume in your life, like the way you assume the air you breathe and the ground you walk on, that may simply need to be questioned, right? Like, those are the things that can be difficult to find. So that's the work I do. If this resonates with you, reach out to me. Let's do a 30-minute discovery call and begin tapping on a few things and seeing if there aren't some massive limiting beliefs around what's possible for your life, what's possible for your spirituality, what's possible for your relational life, if you were to let go of some old ways and embrace something much more organic and true and authentic to you. Hi, Michael here. Hey, seriously, thank you for listening and engaging the Shadow Mike podcast and YouTube channel. I trust today's episode gave you something to reflect on or illuminated a new trailhead to your hidden life. If this episode resonated with you, you can subscribe, leave a comment or review, and share it with your people. This really helps spread the word and boosts our digital presence. Remember, growth isn't a straight line, and we're all figuring it out as we go. I'm grateful to be in this unfolding and excavating work with you. Until next time, be yourself. You've got a good self. And remember, it is all a gift.